The will of Arjun Mehta was read on a stormy night in a mansion that had stood for 200 years, its walls soaked in the blood of generations. The 5 heirs sat in a semicircle, their faces a mixture of greed and dread. Arjun had been a self-made billionaire, a man who had built a pharmaceutical empire from nothing. He had also been a monster, a manipulator, a liar, and a man who had destroyed everyone who had ever crossed him. But he had promised them a fortune, and they had come to collect. The lawyer, a frail old man named Mr. Sharma, cleared his throat and began to read. The will was long, complicated, and filled with legal jargon that made their heads spin. But the final clause was simple, chillingly simple. To each of my heirs I leave a single task. Complete it, and you will receive your share of the fortune. Fail, and you will receive nothing. The tasks are as follows. To my eldest son, Vikram, you must steal a painting from the National Gallery. To my daughter, Priya, you must forge a signature on a contract that will bankrupt a rival company. To my second son, Raoul, you must destroy a marriage, my marriage to your mother. To my youngest daughter, Meera, you must lie under oath in a court of law. And to my estranged brother Sanjay, you must commit murder. The heir who completes the most difficult task, the one that requires the greatest moral sacrifice, will receive the largest share. The rest will receive whatever is left. The room erupted. Vikram screamed about his reputation. Priya wept. Raoul laughed hysterically. Meera sat in stunned silence. Sanjay, the brother who had been exiled years ago, simply smiled. He had known this was coming. He had always known that Arjun's revenge would be the death of them all. Mr. Sharma raised his hand, silencing the chaos. There is one more condition. The tasks are not optional. If you refuse to participate, you forfeit your entire inheritance. And if you attempt to sabotage another heir's task, you will be disqualified and your share will be donated to charity, specifically the charity your father despised most. The heirs stared at each other. They had spent their lives competing for their father's approval, sabotaging each other, betraying each other. Now he was forcing them to do it legally. This was not an inheritance. This was a moral experiment, and the stakes were higher than any of them had imagined.
Vikram was the first to act. He was a respected art collector, a man with connections in the highest circles of the cultural elite. Stealing a painting from the National Gallery should have been impossible. But Vikram had inherited his father's cunning. He bribed a security guard, forged a transfer order, and replaced the painting with a flawless replica. The theft went unnoticed for weeks. He had completed his task, but the guilt was eating him alive. He had stolen something priceless, something that belonged to the nation, and he had done it for money. Priya was next. She was a lawyer, a woman who had built her career on integrity. Forging a signature was beneath her, but the contract she was tasked with forging would bankrupt a rival company, a company that employed thousands of people. She wrestled with her conscience for days, but the fortune was too tempting. She forged the signature, sent the contract, and watched as the company crumbled. The workers lost their jobs, the families lost their homes, and Priya lost her soul. Rahul's task was the most personal. He had to destroy his parents' marriage. Arjun had been dead for years, but his mother was still alive, still grieving. Rahul had to convince her that his father had been unfaithful, that their entire marriage had been a lie. He planted evidence, forged letters, and hired a woman to pose as his father's mistress. His mother's heart broke. She never spoke to Rahul again. Meera's task was the cruelest. She had to lie under oath. She had to testify in a case that involved a childhood friend, a man who had been wrongly accused of a crime he didn't commit. She knew the truth. She knew he was innocent, but she lied. She told the court that she had seen him at the scene of the crime. He was convicted. He was sent to prison. He died there, alone and forgotten. Meera had killed a man with her words. And then there was Sanjay. Sanjay had been exiled years ago, blamed for a crime he didn't commit. He had spent his life on the margins, surviving on scraps, waiting for his chance at redemption. His task was the most difficult: commit murder. And he had no intention of doing it. The heirs gathered again after a month, each one broken, hollowed out by the tasks they had completed. Vikram was a thief, Priya was a forger, Rahul was a destroyer, Meera was a liar. They had all committed crimes, they had all lost pieces of themselves, and they had all expected to be rewarded. But Sanjay was different. He had not completed his task, he had not committed murder, and he was not sorry. "I refuse," he said, his voice steady. "I refuse to become the monster he wanted me to be." Mr. Sharma looked at him with cold eyes. "Then you forfeit your inheritance, Mr. Sanjay. Everything you would have received will be donated to the charity your brother despised." Sanjay smiled. "Do it. I don't care. I would rather have nothing than be a murderer." The other heirs stared at him, their faces twisted with confusion and anger. They had destroyed themselves for the fortune, and Sanjay had walked away with his soul intact. But the twist was yet to come, because Arjun's will was not a test of morality, it was a test of loyalty, and the heir who had refused to commit the crime was the only one who had passed. The charity that received Sanjay's share was not a charity at all. It was a shell company, a front for a network that Arjun had built in secret. The money was funneled back into the family, but not to the heirs. It was funneled to a hidden heir, a child that no one knew existed. Arjun's secret daughter, a woman named Kavya, who had been raised in obscurity, waiting for the moment when she would inherit everything. Kavya was brilliant, ruthless, and utterly loyal to her father's vision. She had been watching the entire process from the shadows. She had seen her siblings destroy themselves. She had seen Sanjay refuse, and she had been instructed to offer Sanjay a choice: join her in rebuilding the empire or disappear forever. Sanjay chose to join her, because in the chaos of the inheritance, he had discovered something that changed everything. Arjun had not been testing their morality, he had been testing their capacity for redemption. The crimes they committed were not the point was whether they would admit their sins. And Sanjay, the only one who had refused to commit the crime, was the only one who had proven he was worthy of redemption. The other heirs were destroyed. Vikram was arrested for the theft. Priya was disbarred. Rahul was estranged from his family. Meera was haunted by the ghost of the man she had condemned. They had all paid the price for their greed. And Sanjay, the exile, the outcast, had inherited everything.
The final will reading was a masterpiece of cruelty. Mr. Sharma gathered the heirs one last time, his voice trembling with an emotion that could have been satisfaction or sorrow. "The tasks you completed were not the real test," he said. "The real test was whether you would confess, whether you would admit your crimes and seek redemption. None of you did, except Sanjay." The heirs stared at him, their faces pale. "You failed," Mr. Sharma continued. "Every single one of you. You committed crimes for money. You destroyed yourselves for money, and you have nothing to show for it." Kavya stepped forward, her face a mask of cold triumph. "I am the rightful heir," she said, "and I will rebuild the empire, but not with you. You are nothing. You are less than nothing. You are the evidence of your father's greatest lesson, that greed destroys everything it touches." The heirs were escorted out of the mansion, their dreams shattered, their futures destroyed. Kavya watched them go, her heart filled with a satisfaction that bordered on madness. She had won, but winning, she realized, was not the same as being happy. It was simply the absence of loss, and in the end, that was all she had left. Years later, Sanjay found himself in a small village far from the empire he had rejected. He was a teacher now, a man who spent his days educating children and his nights reading by candlelight. He had no fortune, no power, no legacy, but he had something far more valuable: peace. Kavya visited him one day, her face gaunt, her eyes hollow. The empire had consumed her. She had become the monster her father had always been. "I should have refused," she said. "I should have walked away." Sanjay shook his head. "You couldn't. You were raised to be a weapon, but it's not too late to change." She looked at him with tears in her eyes. "Is there any hope for me?" Sanjay smiled. "There is always hope, but you have to want it more than you want the fortune." She left that day, and Sanjay never saw her again, but he heard the stories. She had dismantled the empire, donated the fortune, and disappeared into obscurity. She had finally found the redemption that had eluded her father. And Sanjay, the exile, the outcast, had found his purpose: to teach the next generation that power without morality is poison. The inheritance that required a crime had destroyed a dynasty, but it had also created something new: a legacy of truth, a legacy of redemption. And in the end, that was the only inheritance that mattered. The mansion stood empty for years, a monument to the greed that had consumed a family. But then, one day, a group of children from the village arrived, led by Sanjay. They walked through the halls, exploring the rooms, their laughter echoing through the corridors. Sanjay told them the story of the inheritance, the crimes, the redemption. He told them about the father who had tested his children and the son who had refused to become a monster. He told them that the greatest crime of all is to forget that we are human. And as the sun set over the mansion, Sanjay looked at the children and smiled. He had nothing, but he had everything, because he had broken the cycle. He had refused to be defined by the sins of his father. He had chosen love over power, integrity over wealth, and in doing so, he had become the true heir of the inheritance. Not the fortune, not the empire, the legacy of a better world. The revenge, in the end, was not against the family. It was against the greed that had consumed them. And Sanjay had won, not by destroying his enemies, by becoming someone they could never touch. And that, he realized, was the most powerful revenge of all.